you have your Bibles, if you want to go to Acts 27, we'll be there in just a couple minutes. Acts 27. There is one picture I was going to add to the slides, and then I forgot to get it, and then I remembered to get it, and then I wasn't at my computer, so I couldn't get it. And if I wanted to sit here in front of you and be incredibly boring, I could find it on my phone and plug it into the slides, but there's no reason to do that at this point. I'll try to remember to do it next week. And I'll explain what that picture is, and you'll have to visualize. Like back in the day when you used to listen to baseball on the radio, and you could see the picture just as clearly as if you were sitting there in the stadium because the announcers did such a fine job of explaining it. I won't do anything near like that, but I'll try to give you a little bit of a picture of what we're looking at here in just a moment. Talking about the lesson indirectly as we get started here, you can see from the title for the lesson today, Jettison Hindering Cargo. There are a lot that we could pull from the idea that we'll see here in the lesson today. Things that we can take, and we'll touch on some of it, but we've got a 45-minute window, and there's a lot that we could look at and talk about, and we'll touch on some of it, but you could take some of those things that we'll simply touch on and build them out quite a bit further. Interesting lesson, and there are other examples in the scripture. We'll point to one or two of them as we go. Let's go ahead and open up prayer, and we'll get started. Father, we thank you for the day, for your goodness to us. Thank you for the many, many blessings you give. Father, thank you for the opportunity to live in a country where we're able to gather and worship together. Father, where we're able to spend time and do, Father, interesting, fun, exciting things together as family. Father, where we're able to have your word freely, to read it, to study it, to put it away in our hearts. Father, I pray that we'd take advantage of the opportunities that you give us, whether it's spending time with our family here at church or spending time with our families as we go out and do things. God, would you help us to continue to grow the relationships in which you place us? Accomplish your purpose here today, we ask. In your name, amen. All right. Let's take just a moment and look at that. Relationships. As we're here in church, now, this group here, this is not an issue here, but as we have people who will come in, maybe they're just visiting in the community and they found our name on the internet, or they're driving by 15 and they see the sign, well, that looks interesting, maybe I'll visit sometime, maybe they're from the neighborhood. When people come, why do they come back? Generally speaking, the reason they come back is not because of the gentleman that's up here. Generally speaking, the reason they come back is because of those that are seated out here. Relationships. We don't build relationships in one way or another. If we don't build relationships, then people don't feel, the term that we'd often use, plugged in. They don't feel a part. And so we need to be taking advantage of the opportunity to build relationships, and then to build on those relationships. They need to be more than just a, hey, how you doing today kind of a relationship. Over time, those relationships ought to grow so that those folks are not now simply a part of, but they're an integral part of. We want them to not only come and be here, but to be a part of what's taking place here. And so we need to be fully engaged, to be a part of what's happening. And we kind of see that with the Apostle Paul. He's arrested in the temple. We saw that in the introduction to the series back in lesson 1. And he's being beaten. And he asks really a very simple question. Hey, why are you beating me if I'm a Roman? And about that time, the guy with the, whoa, time out, everything stops. Because at that moment, with that one question, everything has changed. But when you look at Paul, he doesn't just stop there. We get to the point now where he's on the ship, and he has a relationship with the centurion. We saw when they got on the boat, they made their first stop, and he was able to go out, to get off the boat and go and talk to his friends in that place where they had anchored for a while. Why did that happen? Because he had developed a relationship. The centurion didn't know his entire background, but was confident enough that he could be trusted. And that the developing of relationship, we find that with the Apostle Paul. He was interested in people. We find that with Jesus Christ. He's on the hillside looking over the city of Jerusalem, and what does it tell us? He's weeping over them with compassion because he sees himself as the hen gathering her chicks. He has a relationship with them. He's concerned for them. He loves them. So even as we're looking at navigating the storms of life and not simply trying to get around them, but sometimes you have to go through them, the need to develop relationships is still important. And sometimes it's the one in the storm that's developing a relationship. Sometimes it's those outside stepping in to put an arm around their shoulder and say, what can I do to help? That relationship building goes both directions. First slide that we have here should be the map. We started at Caesarea, hopped up here to Sidon, went around Cyprus, sailed up here in this area, and then we come down and go around. They don't go through here because there are lots of little islands through here. Wooden hulled ships and islands don't make a good match. And we kind of run into that again today. But they don't make a good match. So they sail around here. They find a place to harbor, and then they say, hey, let's keep going. And if you remember, we saw Paul says, this might not be a good idea. And they kept going. And so they're out in this neighborhood now, okay? That's when you look at what we're dealing with here, that's a fairly long stretch here from Cauda to Malta, okay? They've got some miles to navigate. And so that's what we're dealing with here. Let's see here. The introduction, the first couple notes are just the review now that we're a few lessons in. And we just look at the titles for the last couple slides, or last couple lessons. The first one here, when your plans collapse. College is starting, okay? All around the country. Kids are going back to school. You have your incoming class of freshmen. Many of them have chosen majors. Some are undeclared at this point. Many of them you could go to and say, hey, in 5 years, where do you see yourself? Or in 6 years, where do you see yourself? If we could transport in time and go to that 5 or 6 year mark and see where are they, how many of them are not on the plan that they had set for themselves? The average college student changes their major. I forget what the current number is, but when I was in education, it was like 9 or 10 times. Now think about that for a second. We used to look at college as a 4-year program. It's not anymore. And that's kind of interesting. Because of online learning, it's shorter, but because of finances, it's longer. So it may still be 4 years. It's just not 4 years for anybody. But the average may still fall there. But you have a lot of people, because of dual enrollment, they get out of college with a year under the belt already. Or get out of high school with a year under the belt already. And so the average may still fall there, but it's not 4 years for very many people. Some go 4.5 or 5, and some go 3. Well, they get out, where are they going to go, what are they going to study, and they're changing their major multiple, as they're trying to figure out what they want to do. Plans change. Plans change for adults. It could be your company downsizes. It could be your company is part of a merger, and it didn't downsize, it just disappeared. Whenever there's a merger, now you've got two people doing the same job. What if you're the odd man out? When your plans collapse, make sure you don't. And it is not uncommon for plans to collapse. Trust the slow work of God. We talked about this. God does not work on my timetable. I like to, again, I've mentioned a bazillion times, I've got my calendar with all my stuff plugged in. Things I might do, things I'm planning to do, things I'm absolutely going to do. That said, I am not as much of a, this has to be done by 11:59 or else type of a person. Okay? If you ask me right now, and I've got my calendar in front of me. Phone's right here. I could bring it up and tell you, this is what's on my calendar for next Saturday. We'll go to Friday. Next Friday. On my calendar, it says Williams Grove Historical Steam Engine Association is having their annual show. And right now, at this moment, I'm planning to go on Friday. Becky's at work. Josie's at school. Good day for me to go out and have fun. Okay? So if you ask me, hey, what are you doing on Friday? My normal answer is, I'm not sure yet. And it's not that I'm trying to evade the question. That's the honest answer. Because if work is incredibly brutal that night, guess what? I'm sleeping all day. A lot of times on Friday, I run Friday on anywhere between 30 and 90 minutes of sleep. Because I transition from being nocturnal to whatever it is if you live in the daytime. And in order to do that, I've got to be awake, right? So God doesn't work on my calendar. God, he may look at it and say, in my due time. And we could look at Galatians. In Galatians, we have the verse where it tells us, but when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son. What does that mean? When he was good and ready. And the Jews had been for how long thinking, God, you should be good and ready about now. But he wasn't. Trust the slow work of God. Speak your mind without losing your leverage. Don't blow your chance to minister because you just had to get the last word in. We don't like to be confronted. We don't like to be rebuked. And heaven forbid that anybody should say that we were wrong. We feel the need to get the last word in. Or to make sure that everybody knows that we were right. And in so doing, sometimes we lose the opportunity to be heard the next time we speak. I want to make sure that when I finish a conversation, they're willing to listen to me the next time. Remember back, again, we talked about mergers and all that, so this is a company that's gone. Remember the old E.F. Hutton commercials? I think I mentioned it during that lesson. The E.F. Hutton commercials, when E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen. Do they listen when you and I speak? If we have lost the privilege to be heard, then we might as well be quiet. If we have something to say, we need to make sure that they know that we have something to say. I used to, back again when I was teaching, there were a lot of times I'd walk into class and I'd say something to my kids, something akin to, all right, make sure you guys are paying attention today because I've got something very important to say and you need to know this. That's kind of a hint that says, this is on the test, you better pay attention. Because I like surprises when they benefit me. Okay, I don't like surprises that hurt me or hinder me. And it's kind of the same thing if I'm working with students or even at work. I like surprises where it benefits the people I'm working with for or in charge of. Speak your mind without losing your leverage. And then last week, let divine grace hold you together. In the midst of the storm, when it seems like life is about to fall apart, let God do what only God can do. Don't throw up your hands and say, oh, well, but don't try to micromanage the situation when God is still in control. Let him be in control. Well, let's dive into the lesson particularly today. We talked about jettison, okay? We'll get to the term in a moment. But jettison typically deals with weight, okay? Weights can be helpful. First thing, if you remember last week, we were talking about, hey, this was not on the Great Lakes. On the Great Lakes, I mentioned the freighters. The big freighters are typically what they call the 1,000-footers. They're the notable ones. There's a lot that are 600 to 800 feet. The 1,000-footers, they're the big, more modern ones. You go out on the oceans, they make the 1,000-footers look like toys. Okay? They're bigger, they're longer, they're wider, they're taller, because they have to navigate the ocean seas. You get storms on the Great Lakes, but it's not like you're in a hurricane on the Atlantic. Okay? Different type of sailing vessel altogether. But we're talking about the ship, and if you remember, I was saying, hey, this was not a massive ship, not like we think of ships today, but this was not a small rowboat either. And last week I was saying, hey, we know that there were X number of people, but if you read the passage, it tells us how many people were there. And I hold that for today because we're talking about weight. Not me, not you. We're talking about weight of the ship, okay? But go to, where is it, verse 37? 27:37. And we were all in the ship, 216 souls. Okay, so there are a lot of people on the ship. Last week we were saying, hey, we know there were at least. But Luke gives us an actual accounting. Remember, Luke the doctor, he's a detailed kind of person. And he tells us exactly how many were there. This was not a small boat either. And that's the picture that I was going to add in. Okay? I was going to add the picture of the boat. I had it back, I think it was week 1. I had 2 different samples, one a little bit smaller and one bigger. It's somewhere in that range. When it's on a slide, they look like they're the same size. But they had 200, where were we? 276 people plus cargo. So there was a lot of weight. Weights can be helpful, okay? Just the 276 people, that's a lot of poundage. Weights can be helpful in the right place at the right time. Weights can be helpful and beneficial if it's in the right place, if it's there when it's supposed to be. Weights can be helpful in training. People who are training for, we'll go with running because we'll see that picture here in just a little bit. If they're training for running, they will do weight training because the weights help to strengthen them. And we'll see this in a moment. When it's time to run the race, guess what they don't carry with them? Any extra weight. Weights can add stability. And can be used for ballast. They can add stability, can be used for ballast. Weights are important, can be helpful, but weights can also be harmful. Weights can hinder performance. We'll see that as we dive into the lesson here. They can hinder performance. All right, everybody get ready. We're going to run a race. Hey, you carry this 50-pound bag. Guess who's probably not going to win? It's the no-brainer, right? They can create a disadvantage. In the case that we're looking at today, they decrease or reduce buoyancy. They're used for ballast, that's good. They also then decrease the ability of the ship to float on the water. I mentioned, and we talked about it a little bit ago, the freighters on the Great Lakes. And I like to watch, I don't watch it for a long time, but there's a guy over in Duluth, Minnesota that films the freighters coming in and out. And then I grew up in Upper Michigan, so there's a live cam on the Soo Locks, and I can watch the ships going in and out as they raise them and lower them, and that's kind of neat. One of the things you can see with those that are empty, you can see where the water line was, where it normally rides. And they've got markings, typically at the rudder, that show the depth, so you can see how deep is it sitting in the water. The heavier it is, the more stable it is, but the lower it rides in the water. Which, in the case of a storm, may not be a good thing. Because if it's riding lower in the water, that means the top of the boat is closer to the top of the water. Inherent problems. So this is kind of our introduction as we get started. Think about weights. They can help you, they can hurt you. Depends on what you're doing with them, how they're being used. All right, let's go to our passage for the day here. Verse 18, Acts 27 and verse 18. Luke is writing inspired of God. And look how Luke describes this. And we, he's present, part of this, and we being exceedingly tossed with a tempest. We talked, as I got started, I'll try to paint the picture. Okay, think about this. Paint the picture in your mind. Exceedingly tossed with a tempest. What picture are you seeing here? This boat that's big enough to have 276 people plus a significant cargo is being tossed around. It's being beaten by the storm. And I love, as I read this, that exceedingly. Again, I taught history for a lot of years, taught English for a lot of years. As you're writing this, he's painting a picture. He's using the modifiers on purpose. He's writing it inspired by God to make sure that we can see what was happening. The writer does not write for the writer writes for the reader. So God's inspiring him to write this in this way for you and me so that we can see what was happening. And we being exceedingly tossed with the tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. What did they do? It is time to remove some weight. And the third day, we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. Now, think about that for a second. It wasn't that the storm was they were getting rid of significant parts of the boat. Why? We need to make it so this boat will float as long as possible. And when neither sun nor stars and many days appeared, and no small tempest lay, that's his way of saying it was a huge storm. And no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. They've done everything they can, and Luke finishes this verse saying, we had no hope. What's he saying here? We were doomed. But after a long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them. And I love what he says here. This is not a, I told you so, right? Because if he does that, they don't listen to the next statement. But he does say, you know what, you really should have listened to me. Because he wants to reinforce, maybe you should now. Sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. And now I exhort you. I told you what was going to happen. You should have listened. You didn't, but now I have more news for you. Do you think maybe he had their attention? I exhort you to be of good cheer. Yeah, What did Luke just say? And we being exceedingly tossed with a tempest. We've lightened the ship. We've thrown out the tackle of the ship. And now Paul says, hey, everybody, be happy. Well, that's not what he says, but he said, be of good cheer. Understand, it's going to all work out. Look at the next statement. 276 people on the ship in the middle of an incredibly terrible storm. And Paul says, there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. What's he say? The ship's going down, but the people aren't. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve. And what did that angel say? That angel said, fear not. You're going to Rome. Now, the passage that we're looking at particularly is 18, 19, and 20. But when we've looked at that introduction, saw Paul, hey, speak your piece, don't lose your leverage. These last couple verses, I find them fascinating. But particularly 18, 19, 20. We're tossed with the storm, we've lightened the ship, we're trying to survive. Let's go quickly to Hebrews 12. Look at just one verse here, and then we'll be right back in Acts, probably. Hebrews 12, verse 1. There is some question as to who was the author of Hebrews. If it was Paul, it's kind of interesting in light of what we're reading in Acts today. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. I go to work each night. Over the years, they have relaxed the footwear rules. Back a bazillion years ago, it's probably safety-toed boots only, and then it was boots only, and now you can wear tennis shoes in. I don't. I like my toes, but I don't like steel toes either. Actually, I do like steel toes. I don't wear them to work because I don't like steel toes and metal detectors. When it's time for me to leave, I'm leaving. I'm not stopping to take my boots off. And so, but there's a lot of people that wear tennis shoes in. And there's people who drop boxes and other things on their toes, okay? Think of track shoes versus work boots or any other shoe. Any of you ever picked up track shoes? If you go to the shoe store, if you go to the typical shoe store, they don't have track shoes. But track shoes are incredibly light. There is no extra weight to them. Running shoes are lighter than what you would normally wear just beating around. And they're definitely lighter than my work boots. Significantly lighter than my work boots. Track shoes are light. Why? Because we want to reduce every available ounce. Not pounds, ounces. Well, when we're thinking about this, we need to identify what is the priority. What's the goal? What are we trying to accomplish? What is most important? And that's a question that we need to answer in life. We need to identify what is most important. We need to be willing to remove the trivial. Trivial Pursuit, I like the game. I haven't played it in forever. But I like Trivial Pursuit. My mind tends to remember things like that, so I enjoyed the game. But it's a terrible way to live life, focused on the trivial. We need to be focused upon what's most important. Anything that hinders performance is expendable. Paul whoever the writer of Hebrews was, tells us, lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us. Let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Anything that hinders performance in life, anything that hinders us from running with patience is expendable. It needs to go. It may be bad, it may not be bad, it may just be there. But if it keeps us from accomplishing what God wants us to do, it needs to go. If it doesn't help, it hurts. And we'll see some more about that in a moment here. Life doesn't stop. Again, the whole series here is about God guides us through the storms. And some of you have encountered great, or shall I say, grave storms in life. You've encountered big problems. And you've learned life doesn't stop just because there's a storm. Life goes on. And so we need to figure out how to deal with the problems, deal with the liabilities, and move on. That is tough. That is easy to say standing here. That is tough to say as you're walking through life. And some of you have run into that. It's easy to say, you need to keep going. And in your heart, you say, yeah, right, you've never been there. We need to be willing to listen to godly counsel. When we're in the midst of the storm, it's amazing the people that get our ear. When we're in the midst of the storm, it's amazing the people that we may listen to that we wouldn't have listened to 2 years earlier. I've known people who were, we'll say, faithful in church. They encountered serious storms. And the people who knocked on their door were maybe the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witnesses, who put an arm around their shoulder and prayed with them, and a couple months later he said, where'd those people go? Oh, they're going over there now. We need to listen to people who talk to us about what does God say or want. And we need to make sure that we know what God says or wants. We need to listen to these people. We need to understand and remember that God has set the course for us. God sets the course. God puts these things in life. The idea here, and there's the famous quote, I just put it in first person here. I propose, I make my schedule. Let's say you're driving for a distance, going on a vacation somewhere, and you get hung up in traffic or something holds you back. You can't leave on time. You're a couple of hours late. Finally, you get going. And you find out that there was a significant accident or something that, don't know that you would have been involved in the accident, but you would have been caught up in the aftermath and stuff. How many times has that happened where I have my plans and they don't work out the way I want, and then I find out it's a good thing they didn't work out the way I want? God sets the course. He's the one that puts everything in place. For time. Let's look at the Ecclesiastes passage. I've got 3 verses here. We'll look at just one of these. Go to Ecclesiastes 12, right at the end of the book, which is interesting. You think of the story of Ecclesiastes. Everything is vanity. Vanity of vanity. All is vanity. Life is empty. There's nothing important to it. And then we get to the very end, and the writer of Ecclesiastes, Solomon says in chapter 12 and verse 1, remember now thy Creator. We've come to the end. Hey, get refocused. Look at verse 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. When it comes right down to it, what is it that I need to do? I need to do what God said to do. Micah 6:8, 1 Corinthians 10:31 kind of give us that same idea. Focus upon what's important. Oh, by the way, here's what's important. In the midst of the storm, life comes into focus. Which is kind of interesting because in the midst of the storm, often you can't focus because you're being tossed about, as Luke said. But in the midst of the storm, we start to get a good picture, the best picture of how God works with us and helps us. Because we can see what's truly valuable. They're being tossed about by every wind and wave, and basically everything that's not nailed down is a problem. So if it's not nailed down, into the water it goes. They begin to see what's really valuable. If you can see what's valuable, then you can see what's not valuable. You can see what's worthless. And anything essential, over the side. If it's not essential, it's not needed. I mentioned, there are a couple of instances in Scripture where we see this. There's one right here in Jonah. I don't have time to go there, but in Jonah, there's a big storm. What do? Everything in the water. Still not looking good. All right, let's figure out who's the problem. Where did Jonah go? In the water. But that wasn't the first step. Anything that's not essential, it's in the way. Well, if we're going to lighten the ship, we need to take spiritual inventory. We need to look at our life and take an honest accounting. What traits within our lives need to go? I'll turn here quickly, Colossians in chapter 3. There's a couple passages in Colossians I would have looked at if we had the time here. 3:1 says, if ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above. 3:8, but now ye also put off all these. And then he lists out some character traits. What's he saying? Get these out. Get rid of those things that are hindering you. And we need to target the fruit of the Spirit that we see in Galatians 5. We need to focus upon those traits that are helping us to run the race with patience. Those traits that are helping us to live a Christ-like life. We need to lighten the ship. Well, sometimes we need to look below deck. If all I'm doing is dealing with what's up here in plain sight, I am missing a big concern. I am missing a big part of the weight. We just mentioned this in a different way, but I really learned what's important in the middle of the storm. Okay, keep that in mind. What do we carry that others cannot see? If I'm up, let's say I'm sitting at home on my couch, and I'm watching the ships go through the Soo Locks. They will often tell me, either orally or typing, what the ship is carrying. Coming up there across the Superior, it's often iron ore. They're shipping iron from point A to point B. But not always. So they'll tell me what the ship is carrying, because we know that. They have to report it in their logs, and the logs are public, so we can see that. Okay. I can't see it myself. I see closed hatches. I look at the ship, and to be honest, my vantage point, I'm intrigued by this, but my vantage point, they all look about the same. It's not a question of what people see, it's a question of what's inside. What is the cargo? What do we carry that others cannot see? We need to be ready to jettison the unnecessary, and there's that definition for jettison that I referenced early, to throw overboard for the purpose of lightening the ship. This only occurred during extreme duress. They did not set sail from Caesarea and jettison the load before they even started. The whole purpose was to get the load on the ship to the final destination. They jettisoned the load when it was either the load or themselves, and they usually vote for themselves. This act of jettisoning only occurred during duress. Well, what are some potential hindering cargoes? Let's look at a couple of them. First of all, possessions. Because of time, I'm going to show you the reference. We're not going to have time to go and look at them. I would encourage you, take time to look at the verses. But possessions. We live in a materialistic world. There's no question about it. To be perfectly honest, the entire history of mankind has been materialistic. There's just the material goods that they wanted were different than what we want. I went last night over to Carlisle. It's Corvettes in Carlisle. Okay, I never go over there because I don't like paying money to go to car shows when I can see them for free at car dealerships every once in a while. But last night they had the Corvette parade, and they all drove into Carlisle, and they parked 500 Corvettes on the streets of Carlisle. And I could walk around for free. I like free. It's my favorite word. And so I went over there and looked at Corvette. The money that some of these people have tied up in cars. What's always interesting then was looking at license plates. And there was one, I forget what it said, but basically it was like buy 401k. Like he'd taken all of his retirement investment and bought a car instead. Did he really do that? I don't have any idea. But there's a whole lot better things to put your savings in than a car. What is the purpose of a car? To get from point A to point B. Okay? Preferably in one piece, without unnecessary stops. If you need a tow truck to get from point A, okay, the car's not performing its function. But to get from point A to point B, we are in a period of time where everything is measured. Why is consumer debt so great? Because we want more stuff that we don't need. Because I want to look at a Corvette. I think I'm going to go buy a Corvette this week. At least I'm not. But there may be some people who do. Extravagance versus minimalism. You've got those people who have gone to the minimalistic side. Said, I'm going to get rid of everything. That may or may not be good also. There are a lot of people who get rid of everything and then a year later say, boy, I wish I still had. You need to figure out what's really important. But don't let stuff drive you. Stuff is just stuff. That's all it is. Money. Is money a potential? I'm not saying it is. I'm saying is it a potential hindering cargo? You can go back in Christian history and find that there were incredibly wealthy people who used their monies to enhance and further the kingdom of God. Well, in order to do that, they needed to have money. God blessed them, and they blessed others. But we need to figure out, We need to figure out, and this is the point of the Proverbs verse, what's more important. In this passage, wisdom is more important than gold and silver and rubies and all those things. What's more important? It's not the money. And here's my thought on this. I don't think there's even a blank on this one. A sacrificial giving helps keep priorities in check. When I give sacrificially, I am showing that my money is here for other people too. What is the purpose of money? Well, you got basically three purposes: spend, save, and give. Where does the majority of yours go? Used to be, we could say, if I could check your checkbook register, but how many people actually keep one anymore? Right? Some do, most don't. Most of the kids, they have no idea where their money is going because it's all electronic. They don't pay any attention to it. For instance, at work, most of you are probably the same. I have, mine is direct deposit. I don't get a paycheck anymore. I get paid, I just don't get a paycheck anymore. I don't even get a check stub anymore unless I want to go online and look at it in a digital form. It's an electronic transaction. Well, then they use their debit card or credit card everywhere they go. They never actually touch cash. And part of the byproduct of that is they don't understand the value of money, and they don't understand how quickly money is gone. Because they're not spending cash. It's not like they had money in their wallet that they're using at the cash register. So they don't realize how quickly they're losing it, or that they're spending money they don't really have. There's so many of them that don't understand that a credit card is, you're taking out a high interest loan. They don't understand these things. Money, sacrificial giving helps us to keep our priorities in check. How about bad habits? Habits can be good, habits can be bad. We're looking at potentially hindering cargo. Galatians 5, just prior to the fruit of the Spirit, talking about, like we saw in Colossians, bad character traits. We need to take an honest assessment of self. We mentioned earlier, take spiritual inventory. We need to take an honest assessment of self. When we look in the mirror, what do we see? If we're trying to figure out why life is so difficult, we can point at all the people around us, but do we ever look in the mirror to see if that might be the problem? People at work. Good people, but they couldn't manage an area if you held their hand and told them what to do. And it's always somebody else's fault when things go wrong. And I'm like, do you not figure out what the common denominator is? You need to change the way you do things. Take an honest assessment of self. How about anxiety? Is anxiety a potential hindering cargo? I've got a couple of different passages here. Psalm 37, Philippians 4, 1 Peter 5, 7. The one there in the middle, Philippians, be anxious for nothing. Don't worry about it. Don't fret about it, which is Psalm 37. Don't fret. What do we need? We need to remember that God is in, and I was going to underline complete and then decide, I'll go with control for when it's easier for me because it's at the end of the sentence. But God is in complete, God, it's not like he's somewhat in control. He is in complete control. Oh, here's a big one, bitterness. Is that a potential? I'll be honest, that's not a potential hindering cargo. That is an absolutely hindering cargo. Bitterness. You can look to Isaiah. Isaiah 43 is a reference there. Give your hurt feelings over to God. Let God, it's interesting. We know that God said, vengeance is mine. We know that. Well, I'm not going to go enact vengeance. I'm just going to sit here and stew. Give your hurt feelings over to God. Let God do what God can do. Conclusion. We'll run through this quickly, seeing it's time to wrap up here. We live in a world full of clutter. Okay, we live lives full of clutter. Are we willing to remove the clutter to focus on the things that are really important? Sometimes less is more. I don't need to have a whole lot of stuff to do a whole lot of things. I mentioned car shows. I like going to car shows. I just don't like paying admission. And so I like going for free. And last night, they had like 500 Corvettes parked on the streets of Carlisle. It was a bunch. Without going and paying the big admission fee, sometimes you don't need to have more to do more. And in the Christian life, I need to be willing to get rid of this stuff that's in the way so that I can focus upon what's really important. Now, keep in mind, this next one kind of seems out of place, but remember Paul and Silas in the Philippian jail? And the earthquake comes and opens the doors. What was the jailer's response when he saw the doors open? Sword, kill, right? He's going to kill himself. And Paul and Silas said, hey, sir, everybody's still here. You lose the prisoner, it's your life for theirs. If this ship goes down and these prisoners are lost, you can assume they're lost at sea. But if they're not in your control, that centurion's got a problem. And so everything has to go so that we can make sure that we keep these prisoners alive here. Think about hikers. Hikers don't carry the unnecessary. Hikers get rid of anything that adds additional weight that they don't absolutely need. Because all that extra stuff just hinders the voyage, hinders the trip. Sometimes we try to do too much. Focus upon what's really important. This is one of those things. We've got something to do, and you start this, and let me get this done, and let me come back and get doing what I'm supposed to, and then you see, let me get this done. What do I need to get done right now? Let me focus upon what needs to happen. The whole idea of stay in your lane. Make sure to do what you are called to do. What is really important? Get your calling done. I got a couple of verses there from 1 Corinthians, and then the Bible compares life to a race. We saw that already in Hebrews 12. We live each day to train for the difficult day. Some days are easier than others. I need to take each day in life and prepare for those days that are not easier but more difficult. Then the last point that we have here, do not be enamored by stuff or by people. Focus on Christ. It's interesting in Hebrews 12. Wherefore, seeing we are encompassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. We have all these people above. Let us run with patience. Focus upon Christ. He sees and watches all that we do. He's the one that we need to please. Whether therefore you eat or drink or whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God. Father, would you guide in all that we do? Help us to use these lives that we have to serve you faithfully. We ask in your name, amen. Have a great day.